I'm Brad Jory and am the instructor of intermediate screenwriting. And we work together on this collaborative project. My role was to oversee structuring how the basic project would be done, what the key roles would be. I started out by basically listing, seems like we need certain things. We need a head writer, we'll need a supervising producer, we need a web designer, we need someone who will work as a press agent, we need a social media director. And basically what happened after that was the students came in and each sort of pitched themselves for the roles that they would most like to do. And I think that worked well because there was a buy-in right at the beginning. People would sort of step up and talk about what their interests were, and were able to sort of bring a special talent to each thing. And so from there we went sort of assigned the different roles, and we're off and running. For me personally, it was juggling all of the different little elements that you have to keep going with a project like this, where there are a lot of sort of logistical balls that you need to keep in the air. I was very lucky. My supervising producer was very on top of things and kept, was able to get everyone's contact information. So at the moment's notice, if we needed to get a hold of somebody, Mickey was able to just text them and get them sort of, focusing on whatever we needed to focus on in that particular minute. But it was just sort of that type of things, and putting out fires occasionally, but that's inevitable. You work on a project that has a lot of different aspects to it. There are bound to be times where something falls through the cracks, and just sort of managing all of that stuff simultaneously. That's, I guess, would be the challenge overall. I've liked a lot of the steps of it. I think the obvious thing that probably comes to a lot of people's minds were the improvs that we did in class and some of the recording sessions. There's something exciting about that because you can feel things coming together in the moment. And that was something that sort of happened, we sort of figured out as we moved forward, because there needed to be a decent amount of writing done very quickly, and I wanted more of it to be done actually in the classroom so we could work on it together. And so we would be able to, the students would have a sense of the dynamics that need to be brought into a scene to really make it work. So if something wasn't working, we could adjust in the moment. So the idea of doing improv seemed to work well because each actor pretty quickly started to get a strong sense of where their character was coming from. So you'd put them in different contexts and they could play off that stuff spontaneously. And then we would have writing teams who are responsible for each episode. We have 5 episodes, and so there were 2 people on each episode, except the last episode we had 3 people on. And so those teams, if it was their episode, they would bring in a laptop and they would record the improvisation. So once that was done and they went home and were going to write up the script, they would have all this great raw material to work from. They could cut out the pieces that seemed a little flat and weren't working and accentuate the ones that were, and then add their own embellishments as they went along. And that process seemed to work well. So I just like that whole overall aspect of it. I also like breaking down the story in general and looking at the idea of a 3-act structure with the class and figuring out, breaking it up into the 5 different episodes and figuring out how each episode was going to have its own arc. All of that stuff I think was a lot of fun, and it was educational for me and for the students, I hope. Yeah, it's always hard to know where's the line, how much input should I give as far as creative suggestions. I felt like the characters needed to be characters that they came up with. The plot needed to be theirs. The whole concept needed to be something that came from the students. So each step of the way, we would what would happen is, we would say, for instance, okay, to begin with, we need a concept. So everyone would come in and pitch a different concept, and we would talk about the pros and cons of the thing. And that's where I would weigh in. I would say, well, I think this one seems strong because of this. This seems like it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. And then as a group, it would sort of be decided, well, this one seems like, we vote on things, literally vote on which concept to go forward with. And then the next step would be okay, well, what characters would plug into that scenario really well? And again, students came in, all their characters, we would talk about them. Again, my point where I would weigh in would be just sort of same thing, pros and cons of each character. And then we'd also, with characters, you have to keep in mind, it's not enough for it just to be a good character, it has to be a good character dynamic. So sometimes one character that may seem kind of not that well fleshed out, but we would know they would be interesting in the room with this other character because they would be polarized. And then we would sort of pursue that and flesh that out. So I felt those were the sort of the moments where I could step in and offer some input that would be helpful, without presuming to actually create the thing from the whole cloth out of nowhere. That was their job. Just that it's been a fun experience, and One of the things that I think I set out to do with this class in particular was to see if there were different ways of motivating people that weren't so much just about the carrot or the stick, that had more to do with creating a space where people would feel that they identified with what they were creating, that it represented them in a certain way, and they wanted to participate and take this project each step of the way, not because somebody was sort of, leaning over them and saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to give you a bad grade, or because somebody was tantalized and say, do this, I'll give you a good grade. To sort of downplay that aspect of it and more make the focus on the actual project itself. And I think for the most part it worked, and that's probably been the most exciting thing for me to see, the way I saw people step in and take ownership and really care about what they were doing, not because they wanted my approval or they were afraid of me punishing them, but nothing to do with me really. It was more about themselves and saying, this is something that I'm doing and my name's going to be on it, I'm going to take pride in it, I'm going to make it the best it can be.